once hailed as a groundbreaking leader. Tiffany Henyard's election as Dalton, Illinois' first female mayor, was seen as a powerful milestone. Her win wasn't just historic. It was viewed as a breakthrough moment for a town long stuck in neutral. Young, ambitious, and black, Henyard embodied the hopes of a new generation eager for inclusion, innovation, and meaningful change. She symbolized the dawn of a new era, promising to break barriers and lead Dalton into a brighter future. That promise quickly began to unravel. What started as an inspiring success story soon spiraled into a political nightmare marked by scandal, accusations of corruption, and a deepening crisis of trust. Initially, Henyard's leadership was welcomed as a breath of fresh air. Dalton, a village burdened by years of underfunding and government stagnation, saw her as a change it desperately needed. Her election sparked genuine hope. Not just symbolic optimism, but a belief that real progress was finally within reach. That hope was soon tested. Whispers of misconduct began to circulate, and allegations of unethical practices crept into public conversations. Confidence in Henyard's leadership gradually began to erode. The heart of the growing concern was her pattern of appointing close friends and loyalists, many with questionable qualifications, into key government positions. Critical roles like village attorney, police chief, and village administrator were filled without standard procedures or board approval. To many, this looked less like reform and more like consolidation of power. Critics argued that Henyard was prioritizing loyalty over competence, raising alarms that she was sidelining expertise to strengthen her own control. A repeated disregard for legal protocols and refusal to seek board approval triggered multiple legal battles, deepening the divide between her and Dalton's governing bodies. As scrutiny increased, Henyard became combative, ignoring court orders, dismissing trustee concerns, and operating with what many described as open defiance. The system of checks and balances that defines a healthy government seemed to be disappearing. Had begun as a hopeful chapter for Dalton, descended into political dysfunction. Matters worsened when reports of financial mismanagement surfaced. Accusations claimed Henyard was using public funds to bankroll a lavish lifestyle, including luxury trips, questionable spending, and personal indulgences, all while the village struggled to fund basic services and maintain crumbling infrastructure. The contrast was jarring, and the breaking point came when a key witness, reportedly a former romantic partner, came forward. Their claims were explosive. Alleged bribes from local businesses in exchange for permits and political favors. If true, these accusations pointed not just to personal misuse of power, but to a deep-seated pattern of corruption driven by personal gain. The revelations hit Dalton hard. Residents who had once cheered Henyard's rise now felt betrayed. They had believed in her promise to uplift the village and deliver real progress. Instead, they were forced to confront the possibility that their chosen leader had used her position not to serve the people, but to serve herself. As the scandal grew, Henyard's inner circle, stacked with longtime allies whose competence had long been questioned, failed to restore public trust. For many, these appointments weren't about good governance at all. They were about building a protective shield. What followed was a government consumed by dysfunction, division, and relentless infighting. Despite the mounting evidence and growing public outrage, Henyard refused to back down. She rejected the allegations outright, labeling them as politically motivated attacks designed to discredit her leadership. But the cracks were beginning to show. Her increasingly strained alliances and questionable political tactics only deepened suspicion. What once seemed like an unfair smear campaign soon began to resemble something far more damning, a full-blown indictment of her time in office. The public's patience wore thin as more witnesses stepped forward, their accounts reinforcing claims of corruption and financial abuse. Testimonies painted a chilling portrait. A leader who didn't just ignore legal procedures, but actively bent the system to suit her personal goals. Evidence emerged showing municipal funds used for private spending, while critical community programs were left underfunded and neglected. Then came the turning point, the reported involvement of the FBI. Federal investigators began digging deeper into how state and village funds had been used. The probe expanded to include questions about contract allocations, the flow of public money, and whether any laws had been broken along the way. The fact that federal authorities were now on the case signaled something far more serious. This wasn't just local mismanagement. It pointed to the possibility of wide-reaching criminal activity. Still, Henyard refused to back down. Even as legal pressure mounted and court orders were issued, she continued to make unilateral decisions, bypassing the village board, silencing opposition, and flouting the very laws she had sworn to uphold. Her blatant disregard for judicial rulings alarmed even her former supporters. To many, this wasn't just a leadership failure. It was a dangerous slide away from democratic norms. The village that had once rallied behind her was now gripped by crisis. The community's response was swift and fierce. Town halls overflowed with angry residents demanding answers, accountability, and immediate action. Longtime allies began distancing themselves, and the call for Henyard's resignation became impossible to ignore. The mood in Dalton had shifted dramatically. What was once a hopeful, historic moment had turned into widespread heartbreak, as even more damning evidence came to light. Tiffany Henyard's political future looked increasingly unsalvageable. The woman, once seen as a pioneering force in local politics, now faces not only potential federal charges, but the complete collapse of her once promising career. Tiffany Henyard, once celebrated as Dalton, Illinois' first female mayor, is no longer viewed as a trailblazer, but as a stark warning, a reminder of how unchecked power can lead to collapse. The cost is more than just political. Dalton has suffered in measurable ways. Financially, the village struggles to recover from the aftermath of alleged misuse and neglect. Politically, the damage runs even deeper. Trust in local government, the very institutions meant to serve the public, has been shattered. Residents now question not just their leadership, but the integrity of the system itself. Even as legal proceedings continue, the lessons are already clear. Henyard's story, once a victory for representation and progress, has become a sobering example of how quickly ambition can morph into arrogance, and how ego can corrode the very foundation of leadership. The same traits that once inspired boldness, confidence, and a willingness to challenge norms are now viewed through a harsher lens. Signs of a leader driven not by service, but by self-interest. In the end, the scandal surrounding Tiffany Henyard is not just about one mayor's fall from grace. It reflects something deeper, the essential need for transparency, accountability, and humility in public office. Dalton, a village that once celebrated a groundbreaking victory, must now rebuild, financially, politically, and emotionally. Henyard's meteoric rise and dramatic fall is more than a headline. It's a painful lesson that true leadership isn't about status or symbolism. It's about character, and without it, even the most hopeful stories can end in disillusionment, division, and regret. As the storm of allegations intensified, Dalton residents watched in disbelief. Their once celebrated mayor was now at the center of a widening crisis, a scandal marked by financial misconduct, nepotism, and the unchecked abuse of power. What began as a hopeful new administration quickly unraveled into controversy. Henyard appointed loyal but glaringly unqualified allies into critical village roles, sidestepping both legal procedures and the authority of the village board. To her critics, this wasn't just poor judgment. It was a calculated move to consolidate power, a betrayal of the transparency and accountability she once promised. Her continued disregard for protocol only deepened the divide between her office and other officials, setting the stage for a prolonged leadership collapse. As the accusations piled up, the picture grew darker. Reports emerged of reckless spending, municipal funds allegedly used for lavish travel, luxury purchases, and personal indulgences. Meanwhile, the village struggled. Basic services remained starved for resources, roads crumbled, public health programs faltered, and schools were underfunded, all while Dalton's mayor appeared to live far beyond the means of her official salary. Then came the most explosive moment yet. A key witness, a former boyfriend, took the stand and testified to her alleged misconduct. His testimony rocked the community, painting a chilling image of a mayor who weaponized a position for personal gain, enriching herself and those closest to her while the rest of the village was left behind. The community, already shaken, erupted into open revolt. Instead of offering clarity or contrition, Henyard's response only intensified public outrage. During a tense court appearance, she broke down in a visibly emotional outburst, a moment many interpreted not as vulnerability, but as a leader unraveling beneath the weight of her own actions. Online, the backlash was immediate and merciless. Social media lit up with condemnation. Hashtags calling for her resignation went viral. Trust in her leadership, once high, was now in free fall. Yet rather than face the accusations directly, Henyard pressed forward. At a pivotal village board meeting, she arrived late, delivered a defiant speech, and ignored the growing fury in the room. Audible boos followed her remarks. Her refusal to acknowledge the public's concerns or attempt to make amends only deepened the disconnect. Dalton was now in full-blown crisis, that a village once filled with optimism was reeling from political betrayal and financial disarray. Residents demanded answers. Where had their tax dollars gone? Why were public programs suffering while leadership thrived? New disclosures revealed Henyard's administration had violated state transparency laws, a revelation that sent tensions soaring even higher. Meanwhile, the federal investigation was ramping up. Authorities, who had reportedly been tracking Henyard's financial activities for nearly a year, began to close in. The probe zeroed in on suspicious transactions, potential embezzlement, and the broader misuse of public money. Multiple individuals in Henyard's inner circle also found themselves under investigation, signaling that the alleged corruption may have been systemic, not isolated. What once was progress now looked like downfall. A leader who had inspired hope became, in the eyes of many, a symbol of ambition gone unchecked. Ambition that corroded the very institution she vowed to protect. In a last-ditch effort to rally support, Henyard took to social media, posting a cryptic, religiously laced message. Asterisk, if God is for us, who could be against us? Asterisk, but instead of inspiring strength, the post was met with ridicule. To the public, it felt tone-deaf, a desperate distraction from the reality of mounting allegations. What was meant as a show of faith became another sign of disconnect, as federal investigations gained traction and pressure grew from both residents and local officials. Henyard's political future looked increasingly bleak. Her administration, once hailed as revolutionary, was now defined by dysfunction, secrecy, and betrayal. The community she had pledged to uplift was instead left reeling, forced to confront the wreckage of broken trust, failed leadership, and institutional collapse. Dalton now stands at crossroads. The damage Henyard left behind, through alleged corruption, reckless spending, and erosion of public confidence, won't be easily repaired. Rebuilding will take time. Trust must be earned again. Transparency must be restored. Accountability can no longer be optional. What Dalton needs now isn't just leadership. It needs healing. To Henyard's story, once celebrated as a victory for representation, now stands as a cautionary tale. Because leadership isn't about firsts. It isn't about speeches or slogans. It's about service. It's about integrity. And when those values are abandoned, even the most historic victories can be undone in the shadows of scandal. Her failure to uphold those principles has left a lasting stain on Dalton's political landscape. A community that once rallied around her, now left to pick up the pieces. Alton. Illinois now finds itself fractured, not just politically, but emotionally. Tiffany Henyard's fall from grace wasn't just personal. It broke something deeper. It left behind a village questioning everything. Their system, their leadership, even their own judgment. 81st, Henyard's political career was seen as a breakthrough, a shining symbol of progress. As Dalton's first female mayor and a rising force in local politics, she was applauded as a trailblazer, a figure who represented change, inclusion, and hope for a struggling village. But that applause quickly faded, replaced by whispers and headlines, and finally outrage ate to the heart of the scandal, financial misconduct, backroom deals, and abuse of power. Residents who once celebrated her began to ask hard, painful questions. Why was their mayor living lavishly while basic services crumbled? Why were those closest to her benefiting while the public was left behind? As the truth emerged, so did a grim reality. Henyard hadn't just failed to serve. She had allegedly exploited her office for personal gain. Federal investigators uncovered a disturbing pattern. Public money used for private indulgences, contract allegedly awarded through favoritism, and transparency laws violated in the process. All the while, Dalton's roads, schools, and essential services suffered with each new report. Henyard's inner circle shrank. Political allies distanced themselves. Trustees began to speak out. One even demanded her resignation, a moment that signaled the collapse of whatever political armor she had left. What had begun as quiet whispers evolved into a full-scale federal investigation, drawing national attention that Dalton's fragile political system cracked under pressure, and Henyard's refusal to step down only added fuel to the fire. Her defiance, her refusal to answer to the public or acknowledge the community's anger, deepened the crisis. The trust that once anchored the town's governance had been shattered, and Henyard's every appearance became a flashpoint for frustration. At one contentious board meeting, she arrived late and delivered a prepared speech. The audience responded with boos, frustration boiling over. Her words, instead of calming tensions, further alienated a town that felt ignored and betrayed. Her emotional outbursts, once seen as passion, were now viewed as the signs of a leader who had lost control and lost touch. Meanwhile, the investigation intensified. Allegations of embezzlement, preferential treatment, and shady financial dealings piled up. Henyard's closest aides and confidants were now under the microscope as investigators followed the money and the influence. What had once been a quiet probe was now center stage, and the consequences were becoming real. Then, in a move seen by many as symbolic of desperation, she posted again on social media. Asterisk, if God is for us, who can be against us? Asterisk, the response was swift and unforgiving. Instead of faith, the public saw deflection. Instead of strength, they saw denial. The community was no longer interested in words. They wanted answers, now. As public pressure mounts and federal agents continue to unravel the layers of misconduct, Dalton faces a sobering reality. This scandal isn't just about one mayor. It's about the system that allowed it. It's about the institutions that failed to hold her accountable. And it's about the community that must now rebuild from the ashes of dysfunction and in the shadow of betrayal. Dalton must now ask itself, can trust be restored? Can true leadership rise again? And can a community that once believed ever fully heal? Tiffany Henyard's story began as one of hope and progress. It ends as a warning that unchecked power, lack of transparency, and ambition without accountability can destroy even the most promising legacies. Her fall from grace wasn't just the end of a political career. It was a reckoning for a town still searching for answers and still waiting for justice.